Yeah, I mean, some of these innovations, artistic innovations, are new even for you. Okay, we are making an installation here, participation installation.
A monument.
Okay. Yeah, so we install ourselves, okay? You heard Ruth informing us about the multiple public spaces coexisting with the one public space. And my point is that throughout the history of public space, the concept seems to contain two versions, both the promise of a more transparent social world and a space to which we are exposed. It's both a space of free exchange, but also one to which we are subjected and where conflict seems unending. In this sense, we are dealing with two competing versions. The first version can be described through the rise and fall of public space, as referred to Jürgen Habermas and his Strukturwandel der Öffentlichkeit, the transformation of the public space in the 60s. And the second version would describe public space as always and structurally constituted by a conflict that will make it into a space of struggle. And these two can neither be fused into a common story, nor can we choose between them. However, these narratives coexist today with a much more differentiated world of public spaces. So I go back to my seat and stream. So, what I would like to...
There's a mic.
Yeah. Tack, Hege. So now that we have been listening, can you hear det där? Kan du höra det då?
It's the switch. Oh God. Oh, is there not a switch anywhere? Try it.
Ja, men då hör du det.
Yeah, okay, that's it. Yeah, great.
Yeah! So you see, in the 19th century, print was absolutely crucial for what we consider the public space, according to Habermas. And then it was, you know, the ideal public space relied on printed matter, such as outlined by Immanuel Kant. The public space would rely on readers dispersed in space and time, but sharing a common rational project. And this idea of public space is the idea of a world of communication, rational reflection and judgment. So what I would like now to open up the discussions, because now we have listened to you, Breda, who, you know, what would you consider are the most crucial changes, according to you, if you return now to the change in the Ljubljana Biennial, and what would you consider as, Thomas, as an artist, where you could work that you did not before, and you to say a bit more of how the artistic innovation when it comes to public space.
But I think we've seen that in all our, in all the presentations. I mean, what Breda was talking about, and also Thomas's experiences. I'm quite interested in finding out how, whether maybe both Biennale, but also Thomas in his own work, whether you experience certain tensions more than, let's say, 20 years ago, or and do you see the effect of what we might call the new public sphere as something positive? in terms of, the Ljubljana audiences, for example, is there any noticeable change, or is it too early? Because this is one of the things I think some of the writers point out, that of course, a lot of these developments that are occurring at the moment, they haven't really been examined in great detail, and to some extent, we haven't got the research methods, but they're also very difficult to examine, because so much of it happens by chance, as it were, like, I mentioned sheep, what was it? No, a rare sheepdog breeder in Bavaria. That opens up a totally different audience, incidentally. I don't have a friend who's a rare sheepdog breeder, but that doesn't matter.
Well, yes, I mean, in Ljubljana, there, after 15 years, as I already told, people are expecting those things already, so they have learned to read them. Mm-hmm. At the beginning, of course, it was a problem because, I mean, advertising is fair, media. We had different feedbacks. As I already, maybe I will point out this Minerva Cuevas case. This was one of the good feedbacks, actually, but that was also her work that contributed to that, because she's a political artist. She always worked, an activist artist. She always worked in deals with the issues from the society where she makes a project. Mm. And in 2001, Ljubljana was, and Slovenia was before the referendum to enter the European Union and to join the NATO. So this was a big debate going on in Slovenia, and that was the main issue, actually. So she created this project for billboards. As you've seen, it was an European flag with stars, and the question posed, and then decided it was NATO. So the question posed was, the title also was, how long it takes to NATO. So at the beginning, people thought that it is the advertising poster for the referendum. Yeah. And we got a lot of different feedbacks because of that. But then 9/11 happened. And we were forced to take off all the billboards by Minerva Cuevas because the politicians thought that it might influence the relationship with the United States and with NATO. So it was reversed. That is one thing that...
Would you call it censorship?
Yeah, it was a censorship. It was a censorship. And that is also one thing that I pointed out when I was talking about the freedom in the public space and the liberty in the public space. I mean, how is the reaction of society? Then also the poster, the billboard with tits, you saw, it made some problems. Parents were calling us and telling us that this is not appropriate, so that we need to put it down. So there are feedbacks. I mean, these ones, I mean, are really visible. We are not able to monitor everything, of course. It's impossible. Though, for instance, Anja Schmeidek project also with these public sculptures, meant to be involved in monitoring, but it was mostly because people were monitoring things really, and they were giving us feedback because if something was broken somewhere, so we were able to repair it and change it or replace it. Not really other kind of monitoring like in essential feedbacks. We had problems with newspapers. People didn't know what to do with those pages. And why? There were a lot of questions posed. Why are you doing this? Why do we are paying for this? So there are feedbacks, of course, but now this has become somehow more normal. Maybe also projects are not so political or provocative. Yeah. Yes, maybe because they're also some of them were really very aesthetical, highly aesthetical. I don't know. I mean, but it's true that we are not. We don't really have a system of monitoring yet. I mean, how the things in public space are really perceived. That's
Do you know anything, Thomas, in your case with the Snowden project? Did you receive, what was the reception of this?
I referred to Snowden, but I never made a real Edward Snowden project as such. Or I forgot it. No, I refer to him, and I think it's a very interesting and important figure, having been someone who controls public space, basically, or part of the public space as Secret Service. And looking at public space, I myself see, on the one side, I see the traditional, old school public space, and which is fought after. And if you have been in Palestine, for example, and you see curfew, the curfew keeps people in their houses, forced to stay at home, and society is crumbling if this happens on a long term. But at the same time, this public space, for example, in internet, I would consider as well partly public space, can be controlled. One click and you can't enter anymore Google in China. And I'm not a fan of Google, of course not, but it provides a lot of information. And that a government has the opportunity just to keep this information away from us is a lot of power. It's so much power. I mean, and this is a tradition, of course, that the governments try to control the people and our thinking, and to what extent can we undermine that? And for me, as an artist, I try, of course, to look at these things and where can I intervene, and do I want to interact as an artist? And if I use a medieval printing technique, of course I have to think, how can this be relevant nowadays? Is it relevant nowadays? So, but this is a mixture now of questions, but yeah.
Relevant nowadays, on my way to Berlin, I came over this one this summer. It's an issue of art, Kunst, Stadtraum, Kunst, public space art. And the first thing I read here is about Thomas Kilper, because for the first time signed, numbered, limited edition artwork appears in conjunction with Berlin Art and Kunst. Berlin-based artist Thomas Kilper created When We Revolt, an exclusive work dealing with the issues of art, the public space, and citizen rights. So that was a medieval technique that suddenly got known through spreading the dissemination of knowledge in this one.
Yeah, thank you, but it's a small edition, and I was never doing anything like this before, so I had to learn it as well.
Sorry, can you say a little bit? I didn't quite. Was the artwork in the magazine, or
it was announced woodcut in how huge was the edition, or how many?
It's about 60 centimeters
Yeah.
by 40. Actually, it will be integrated in the exhibition at the National Gallery here in Oslo, so you can walk it. Yeah, it's. Sometimes I use my opportunity to develop a work like a diary. So I put together images and figures I thought they are important. Harun Farokhi is in it. He just has died shortly before I made the work. And yeah, issues on the migration crisis are in it. So, but it's very small, and it was a challenge for me to work small, and it's nice. It's an edition. It's a very traditional format. It's just you can buy it, and it's not that expensive, but yeah. In my other projects, I'm not able to do really editions, for example. So yeah, this is as well an issue. How important is it for us to multiply, make hundreds of your prints, and is this important or not? And
Yes, because usually you are working with site interventions and they are not edited. Well, when it comes to the slow space, because that's the name of what it is, said the project that promoted Katie Peterson here in Oslo and curated by Anne Beate Hovin. But this opened up for quite another perspective, because when I was talking about this one, it's the traditional technique and traditionally announced in a journal. However, when it comes to her way of dealing with the public space, could you say something more about that?
You mean Katie Patterson?
Yes.
Well,
your former student.
Yeah. Well, I was quite struck because Thomas also talked about you talked about your process as being slow, and you see your whole method of working, including this ancient technique as a kind of bulwark, sagt man auf Deutsch, ne? Bulwark against the speediness, and yet at the same time, and I think that's also something that I'm very aware that whatever we look at, I don't think there's anything that's, we can't regard the public sphere as entirely negative, and it is controlling, the internet is controlling, and at the same time, and this is, I think that's the difficulty that we, at all levels, as artists, as everyday human beings, have to negotiate, is the contradictoriness of these features. Is it liberatory? Is it oppressive? And it's both, and that's the difficulty to me, that we're not dealing in binary constructs, but and so there's both the slowness of the whole project, of Thomas's project, in quite a different way from Katie's. So in Katie's project, I think it's that really daring casting of time and space, in a way, into the future, that most artists maybe would wish for, but they don't build it into their project. So that's quite, I'm sure other artists have done it too, but this is quite a
But leaving an imprint, she did quite immediately, because she got 1 million, what you say, treff?
Yeah, hits
yes, quite soon after the launching of the project.
That's quite small nowadays, isn't it? Is it? Well, if you look at figures nowadays, you run into millions quite quickly. You would be happy.
Yeah, to have 1 million hits, I would be happy.
Well, but I was wondering about that, because you haven't, and maybe it's just my ignorance of how you operate, but do you actively use social media to publicize a project or invite people in to, is there a performative aspect that people come and see you work?
I mean, in general, to use the woodcut, for example, or linocut, is not a statement against digital age as such. I use digital media, I invite by email, and I have a website. I don't go on Facebook, I'm not a Facebook follower, and Twitter myself, for certain reasons, just too much information and too many emails anyway, and stuff like this. But of course, this is what the youngsters are doing nowadays, and it's fine. They organize themselves a lot of times with Facebook, and it's much quicker than emailing. So I'm a bit old school. That's fine. But the slowness, somehow, during my project, I enjoy and hate at the same time. So why is it, and I have only 4 weeks to do a project, for example, now in Oslo, and it puts stress to me. Have a floor cut, 80 square meter to do in 2 weeks carving, 2 weeks printing. So it's, you're very slow with that. But at the same time, when you are in it, I can very much enjoy that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of Christiane Baumgartner, who incidentally is also not opposed to, I think everybody is aware of her work, is not opposed to, technological innovations, but she described the same process, that the actual cutting is quite meditative, and she enjoys it, and she hates the printing. But sorry, this is going away from the topic.
No, it's fine. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
But when it comes to innovative ways of making a way into the public sphere, Breda, when it comes to innovative new ways of making ways into the public sphere or the public spheres, could you be more specific concerning our new colleague, Apollonia Sustesis? Because she is the head of the Master of Art and Public Space here now for 1 year. So could you be more specific, informing us about the project that you already have?
Well, what more specific could it be? There was a project that she did in the collaboration with other Slovenian artist, Jože Baršić, conceptual artist. They prepared.
But they used, they used media.
They were in Dnevnik newspaper, because they were our media sponsor. So we had projects in media in newspaper, and their project was one of them. But actually, this project was this was in a way only a visual image of what was going on radio waves of Radio Student. They were given a kind of a very short statements on Radio Student waves in Slovenian language, of course, because it was aimed for Slovenian public.
So what we have been talking about earlier, at least the three of us here, is that the difficulty, the challenge when it comes to documentation, because it's little research in this field yet. So, but it has been some research, hasn't it, Ruth?
Well, I think Mechtet Friedrich tried to coin this term, performative monument,
Performative monument, yes.
To draw attention to the fact that the old-style permanent monument now, if we think of more participatory art or conceptual art, we encounter them largely through documentation, whether that's images or reading about them or now on the internet, etc., etc. So hence this notion of a performance, in a sense we engage through them performatively. So to put those two concepts together, that and in some ways the new forms of art making require documentation, because they are often distributed and happen in different places or are short-lived, etc. So we know them. We know Francis. Maybe somebody is here and saw Francis Alice in Mexico, but Mexico City. But most of us know about this work through what the image we've seen and what we've read about it. So, in a sense, that is happening more and more. So, again, well, first of all, there's also the question: to which extent do we, do we need to have been there to experience the work? Similarly, with I made that point with Katie. Yeah. That does it enhance the necessity of being there, of seeing your prints, And at the same time, you know, we might not. I mean, that is actually more a question for the younger audience, I think, not for a dinosaur like me.
Well, that's a way of opening up questions from the audience. Please raise your hand. No. Yeah.
For the...
I think this... You were first?
Okay.
Okay, pardon me.
No,
Yeah.
but he has a
Okay.
microphone. So.
So,
Who speaks? Right.
and as Jan has pointed out, please inform about your name, whether you are a practitioner.
Yeah, my name is Gro Finne, and I'm an artist based in Oslo. And the topic was freedom in public space. And I love trees, I love books, I love freedom. And when you talk about Katie Patterson's project, I was a bit shocked, because for me, this sounded very oppressive and undemocratic. My question is then, well, I don't feel that this project is freedom. The artist will decide even about our future. Well, that's my comment to it.
Oh, if artists can decide about our future, that's an interesting perspective. I think maybe Jonathan Mese has got this idea, but the dictatorship of art. But I can't see this in this very project you refer to. Maybe there's irony in it, and maybe artists as well have the task to give you some miracles or some questions on our way to the future, and to not only clap hand or so. I see there's a lot of openness in this project. I'm not afraid about. Even we don't know in 100 years is this
100
project
years, yeah.
in 100
yeah.
years.
Well, last year. It's 99 now.
Now 99 years will we have still books to be printed on wood paper, so to say. We don't know.
Yeah.
But it's open.
Yeah.
And Katie will rest somewhere, maybe. Maybe not.
Did this answer convince you, Gro?
Agree.
No, it doesn't. I speak about my feelings. I feel it very oppressive. So,
I'm not quite sure I understand what you find oppressive. I mean, also I don't think I mentioned that it was to do with freedom, but you know, that's
yeah,
such a
you
big word.
was talking about freedom in public space.
No, no, print in public space. Print was the topic. Yeah.
But what is the oppression?
Yeah.
I mean,
yes,
that would be interesting to know,
Yeah.
because is the oppression that the nice trees will be cut into pieces and destroyed and put into pulp to make books? This
No.
transformation is, of course, sort of an aggression against the tree.
Yep.
Is this what you worry about?
No, but I think she decides about something that I think it's a kind of undemocratic. It's an intervention that, well, it doesn't give me any freedom then.
But you
No.
know what happens when you try to make democratic art? I think, was it Kumar and Melamid who made paintings that were based on, was it representative opinion? Yeah, they collected, I don't know the exact nature of the work, but they collected views on what they should paint, what would represent certain public's view on what they should paint. So
They pose
it was an
questions about-
interesting project to which extent it was good painting, I think, is a question, and maybe it was. Komar and Melamed, two Russian artists. They did it in the States, I think.
Okay. Who's next? No, your turn, Theo. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Patrick, for the internet. I'm Theodore Bart, and I work here. I read a medieval text some time ago where they made a distinction not only between public and private grounds, but also grounds without claims, and also grounds beyond jurisdiction. And I found that interesting to broaden our scope on grounds, as it were, not only to have the binary private and public. In Breda's case, I feel, for instance, is a number of the works that we saw were not just art in public space, but inquiring into publicness and putting it into question and finding out what publicness might be. And in Thomas' case, I mean, inquiry into meanwhiles, this kind of unclaimed spaces, at least temporarily, and then doing things, exploring those spaces as contemporary spaces. And then also the Norwegian Woods project. I felt that, okay, this is a kind of a string. It could be in a galactic dimension or very small, but we wouldn't know because it's beyond our time scope. We won't be living to see this. And so this kind of wormholing of reality and time that can go through, explore, let's say, the boundaries of spaces beyond jurisdiction, which might be, you know, the undemocratic aspect of this because, you know, it's on the boundaries of what we can consider public as a democratic society. So in this case, you know, we could discuss in that way too. And also, let's say that the sort of modern historical space is now being perforated in a number of different ways by forces that are beyond the artistic field, but that the artistic field needs to, in a way, gestalt in order to provide an awareness and a critique. I mean, being available in a lucid way to what's actually going on in the world and making it available for discourse. So I'm just wondering if it would be possible to, in a way, pull apart occasionally the public, the private, the grounds beyond claim, and the claims beyond jurisdictions, for instance, those surrounded by corporate interests and barbed wire, for instance, and see what happens when we inquire into these actively, artistically, and put them together again. Might our sense of publicness then go beyond, in a way, the traditional civic space, the Habermasian public space? So that's my question, I guess, to the panel.
It sounds to me like a manifesto for new artworks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have an answer to that.
Yeah. Well, it's a
I mean,
a
you
manifesto.
elaborated it so that I don't have an answer to that.
What the new publicness could constitute.
Yeah.
When you,
I mean, I suppose this whole issue.
it's a very, sorry.
Sorry, yeah. No, I was just going to say, one only finds out what the limits are of the spaces that are public and do not underlie jurisdiction. I remember reading about the art ensemble, critical art ensemble, you know, just trying to do stuff in the urban space, and we are talking about public space. That's the other question: to which extent public space now? Where does it stop nowadays? Because conventionally, immediately what comes to my mind is the urban space, but that's not necessarily public space. Forests are public spaces too nowadays, etc. And you know, where is there any space that escapes jurisdiction except for very short periods? And like Thomas mentioned, and I was quite intrigued because Thomas said, well, I don't work in the public space, but my question to you was also, as soon as you identify space, even if it is private, does it not take on a semi-public form just by being turned into an artwork?
It's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
And where is the private space starting,
Yeah.
and where is the public space beginning or ending, and vice versa. And I define an empty building as well as somehow a semi-empty, a semi-public space. So, because of course it belongs to a private owner normally, or maybe the state is, and you're not allowed and entitled normally to go in, just like breathing in and out. There's a door, and maybe you squat and you take it, and then you have a banner, like the classic format of taking space. Even then, it's a semi-public space. And
these abandoned
of
buildings are
this is referring to buildings. And just nowadays, if we see how, for example, in Hungary they protect the border, so the border is as well part of the public space, and it's fought for. So it's always a fight. How can we open it? To what extent can we open it? And to what extent do we need a protection? What do we protect? Against what elements do we protect? And so on. These are issues to be debated. And I wish, of course, a society which is fairly open as possible. But of course, I want as well to have the space for intimacy, and not to be with you 24 hours.
Well,
Could I just have a brief comment? Because I think that the grounds beyond jurisdiction, examples of that would be like the transatlantic trade agreements, where courts of arbitration are private and not suggestively not under the state of law. I mean, the national courts, and that in a way the large corporate interests that are cropping up in various associations with state capitalism, but not necessarily under national jurisdiction, could create in big areas of grounds beyond jurisdiction, possibly, and not maybe applicable to Europe, but certainly to the third world and the relations of exploitations that exist there. And then to Thomas, I'd like to say that shutting of the internet is one thing, and then listening in on the big hubs is another one. And to me, that is also bordering onto, the grounds beyond jurisdiction. It's a little bit dystopic turn of discussion, I agree, but I think that these areas need to be, in a way, part of our discussions in art and public space.
yeah, I mean, if you produce a work for a media space, for instance, as a newspaper like page, it also has to be privately read, because you can skip it. You don't even see it while you are browsing through newspaper. And it was, it's that we as a producer, we are trying those limits. As I told, it's not so easy to get the information back. But I think we will develop a kind of strategy. I hope we will. Otherwise, it's not really worth to do it, because we don't know who our audiences are. But it's also, for instance, we tried at the 27th Biennial also use private apartments and open them up as a public space. That was a big thing to do, because it was very difficult, but it was not private apartment of mine or of a staff or something. We really wanted to have apartments in Ljubljana, in the city, not far around, so that they could be visited. Of course, now here we really reach this border, because you cannot open up private apartment as a gallery space, because people cannot really be home all the time and waiting for visitors. So you have to make a system. And it was very much criticized, because because only those people who were really very attentive find out when those visits will be. So they were really limited. So yeah, it's an interesting debate.
Hi, I'm Walter Ruth from Göteborg, Sweden. I'm the chairman of the Artist Collective workshop there. I'm an artist myself, but I'm also a scientist. I have a question regarding to you. You mentioned that the biennial has become more of a producer, and earlier you were a promoter. I think we have a problem here. This can be compared to cultural politics. It can be compared to what has happened with some financing agencies for research in natural sciences, in human sciences, and now it turns into art. That in Sweden we have a notion that cultural politicians should be hands-off. They should not decide what that should be made, what art should be done. I think when a resourceful event such as a biennial starts to decide what it should be about, then this can be problematic. I think this is an issue that has to be discussed.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm not a cultural politician, neither is the organizer of the biennial. We are the organizers, and we didn't turn, as you said, to the producer only. Yes, we are also a producer. It is an added value, as we see it. And we are able to make new works and enlarge our collection also in this way, which is great. And but I don't see this question. This question was raised 20 years ago, and we kind of dealt with it, and we went further, and we're doing quite good. So I don't see it as a problem. And we are not politicians. We are just professionals.
If I would like just one comment on the one side, I mean, Documenta, for example, or any biennial, they have a lot of power, of course, and they define what is currently important in production of contemporary art. Of course, it has a big impact on our life as artists and the scene around us. But if you want to make something really contemporary, you have to produce new work, and you have to commission new work. Otherwise, you only can show what is already produced before. And to make art really contemporary, I think the format of giving an artist a chance to produce something new for this particular exhibition is very helpful for us, and we need that. But on the other side, of course, we have to question what is the curator at Documenta doing? Is it really worthwhile? And develop our critique. And Hans-Ulrich Obrist or Caspar Koenig or all these figures, they are power figures within our field of art, of course. And we need to develop a fundamental critique at points. And this is important. But as such, the format is important as well. I mean...
Thank you, Thomas.
Was that a sufficient answer?
Yeah, I'm not opposing to this. I think, but I think this question is not discussed enough. I think we may risk of missing the very new contemporary art sometimes, because these very resourceful and powerful organizations, they also start to be non-contemporary sooner or later.
True, and they will have to change in order to survive.
Yeah, we have to be very careful. For example, Venice Biennale, the Italian pavilion, was curated by a friend of Silvio Berlusconi, basically. It's appalling. Of course, this is not to be accepted. But we have to figure it out very precise and have a look what happens. Is the government directly putting a curator into place in such a and stuff like this? And this shouldn't happen.
Do I see some raised hand? Yes. Could she have the mic?
Moifrid?
Hei. Moifrid Tveit er kurator ved Grafikk- og tegnesamlingen Nasjonalmuseet. Oh, engelsk. I'm curator at the collection of prints and drawings at National Museum. And I would like to ask a question to Thomas. Our next exhibition at National Gallery will be concerned about woodcuts from 5 centuries. And we're happy to have Thomas Kilper with us. So, one of his projects. He will have one of the rooms in the exhibition, and it will be the first time that I think that you will carve in a museum floor. Could you say something about your thoughts concerning working with a project in a museum building compared to other public buildings or areas?
Thanks for the question. The concept I try to realize is very easy. It's basically what happens on the floor, I try to give back to the floor. So this is the idea, and to refer to the site as such. And as this very floor is part of the museum, of course, the history of museum, I will try to discuss together with my fellow artists who join me from Academy in Bergen, and then the situation around the museum, Oslo as such, from a perspective coming from outside. For example, in Oslo there is the decision that a Nobel Prize is given, Peace Nobel Prize, to the European Union, for example, in the year where 3,000 people drowned in the sea, coming to Europe as a contradiction to a peaceful situation. And so there will be a lot of different aspects I try to address, and I'm very excited. And yesterday I learned to have less time than I thought I have, and stuff like this, so makes me nervous. And it's a big new challenge to do something not in an abandoned building, but in a museum, and sort of a very popular museum. So yeah, new challenge. Sorry? I had to go to compromise in this issue, because the parquet as such is not in my space. What I have given is a stone floor, and I didn't want to make a lid tool. It's a good question. Why? I'm not allowed to. It's listed. The stone is part of heritage, and I'm not as important to question the heritage.
Clearly
so
a space under jurisdiction.
I make a compromise, or they or we, to put something on top and carve on top. Yeah, it's a woodcut exhibition, so it would not exactly be appropriate to make a litho. I would have loved to make a big litho, yes?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we are very much looking forward to your exhibition, Thomas, but I'm also sure that you're looking forward to lunch. And hopefully you keep your curious questions for the next session, pop out if you have not used the occasion now.
Or talk to us over lunch.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.